Okay, great. Thanks for logging in today. I want to invite you all to settle in for a great afternoon lunch and learn. We're going to be talking about inspiring millennials towards organizational commitment today. I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Stacia Rice. I'm with MSBCoach, and today we're going to be enjoying Michelle Braden's presentation. So just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. This is our third Lunch and Learn hour this year. We have a webinar series where we talk about leadership opportunities for growth and development, and I'd like to invite you to the next one, and it will be the last one of the year, and it's about owning it. And this really talks about, there's sort of the aspect of owning your place in the organization and your commitment level towards your leadership development. So, and that is in December, and that'll be on Wednesday the 13th at about 12 o'clock right here. So you'll just register at MSBCoach.com, and we look forward to talking with you then. Also, I wanted to let you know that we have published 3 different books, and they are available on Amazon. The 3 books work together as a team to help you develop in your leadership journey. The first is Stand Out, and it's really talking about your own leadership development. The second is Dare to Make a Difference, which talks about your ability to develop your team. And the third is really focusing on the bottom line. Now, the fun thing about these is that they are designed to work together, and they are also designed to be a daily reflection. So you'll read some poignant information, and through a series of questions on a daily basis, work to make some changes, some real and lasting changes in your leadership by virtue of creating new habits and new neural pathways. So I invite you to head over to Amazon or to MSBCoach.com, where you can link to those and have them for your own. Throughout today, we are going to have this screen pop up. We really like having interactive webinars. We feel like one of the beauties of having all of this technology at our fingertips is that we can connect with people from all over the world who want to learn and grow in the same ways we do. So one of the ways we're going to do that is to invite you to ask questions throughout, as well as to answer our poll questions. So those are going to pop up, and we'll share information about how you're voting as that. So again, if you have any questions, please feel free throughout the time to pop those in. We like to have it interactive and sort of fly up by the seat of our pants a little bit, so you won't interrupt if you have a thought, an opinion you would like to share, or a question that we can approach. So again, my name is Stacia Rice, and I'm a leadership coach and trainer with MSBCoach. And I'll be kind of navigating us through today, but I'd like to introduce Michelle Braden. She's our CEO and president of MSBCoach. She's been coaching for many years and is our fearless leader. So I hope that you all enjoy today's presentation, and we're going to kind of move on from there. And I'll let you to it, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Stacia, and it is wonderful to be here with you. And I do want to introduce one other person that I don't have her picture up, which is a real shame, and it's because we really kind of decided just a few days ago that we wanted her to join us for this, and I wish we had decided even earlier, but she is a part of our team. And I'm going to let her introduce herself. So we wanted to show that we have 3 different generations present here. We have a millennial, which is
I'm Ariel Vaughn. I'm the bookkeeper with MSBCoach, and I'm the millennial.
That's right. And I invited Ariel I said, Ariel, I just want you to pop in, and if there's some comments that you want to make, if you agree with what we're saying, if you disagree, I thought it would be wonderful to have her sharing those, and also, where it may be appropriate for her to share where a leader has, of an organization withholding any names, may have inspired her to want to be more committed to that organization, or even just the opposite. Because sometimes we have experiences where we want to be less committed or even quit in an organization. So we'll get a little bit of feedback from her on that. And then, of course, we have Stacia here, who is representing our Gen X. And I won't tell you what generation I'm from, so you can just imagine. You can fill in the blank with the one that's missing. But it's great to be here with you guys today. So we are going to take the next hour, maybe even a little less. I've always found that no one complains when you get done early, but you do complain if we go too long. So we may get done a little bit earlier today, all depending on what you write in, your feedback, and just to play off what Stacia said. Please feel free to jump in if you have a comment, if you have a thought. We want your feedback. We want you to share as we go through today's webinar. I know the three of us were sitting here talking before we got started, and we're getting so energized around the conversation that we're about to have today. So hopefully you will be equally as energized. So a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about. So we will first, I think it's important, and many of you may already know what a millennial is, but I feel pretty confident that we have some stats that are fairly staggering that I think people may not truly have a thorough understanding. So we're going to talk about defining the millennial, the impact that the millennials are having right now on our culture and our workplace. And then we're going to move to, well, once we've established who the millennials are, then how do we define commitment? Because we're talking about inspiring millennials to organizational commitment. So what does commitment look like? And then what stimulates commitment in the workplace? And then what are millennials looking for? Are they looking for something that's different? And how do we invite them in to be a part of the organization in alliance with what they are looking for? And inspiring that commitment in them. And then we'll do a quick review. As Stacia said, there'll be poll questions that run in between. We'll ask you to jump in quickly with those. And that way we will be able to keep moving here throughout this, our brief time together. So I want to share a quote with you, and this was actually part of our description of our webinar today. And I'm going to ask Stacia and Ariel to share, what does this mean to you? When you think about this from the organizational perspective, and for you and our audience, if you have a thought on what this quote means to you, I would invite you to write in and to share that with us. So the quote is, effective commitment in the workplace happens when there is an emotional attachment and a desire to be a contributing partner within the organization. So when we think of that, I know that's a lot of words, but Ariel, let's go to you first. What does that mean to you when you think about yourself in an organization?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that quote because I feel like, especially as a millennial, we're definitely looking for like purpose and belonging, and to actually feel like what we do matters to the organization. That's going to have that impact of how much effort we put in, and our commitment to the others around us, that we want to really work harder if we're more attached to what we're doing.
Wow, well said, thank you. Stacia, how about yourself?
So as I kind of reflect back on my varying levels of commitment to different organizations that I've worked with, I think when I read this, it made me think about the times where my own desire for growth and contribution was in alignment with what was happening in the organization, and when I felt the passion of saying, that this was something I really wanted, I would work harder. I would work longer. I would, if I felt both the commitment from the organization and my leaders around me, even better, that they were, sort of in my corner, so that, not just for my own development, but just for the ability for me to have impact on, either the bottom line or the goal at hand. So, yeah, I think it, for me, was sort of that ready to go above and beyond without any hesitation or even feeling resentment. I was all in because I wanted to be, and that's kind of what commitment means to me in that regard.
It's interesting because even though we've already heard from two different generations, I mean, we're hearing a lot of similar things. And I think from my own experience, I think about the organizations that I've been a part of that I felt very committed to, especially even early on in my career. And I look back, and there were some organizations that I didn't feel as committed to, and it was a very transactional thing where I was just doing a job to get a paycheck, versus other organizations. Now, I always wanted to work hard and do the best job, but it really was just about, okay, let me just get my paycheck here, versus other organizations where it was impactful, where I felt like I was really making a difference. And a big piece of what that connected to was how I felt about my leadership, how I felt about the colleagues that were working around me, and what it was that we were working on. So, I find it interesting as we go through this webinar today that the gap isn't so great between what each of the different generations are actually wanting in the workplace as we have tried to make it. Now, I'm not saying there's not differentiators. There definitely are. But and you decide for yourself as we go through this if the gap is as huge as we think it is. So I'm sure we have varying generations here represented on today's webinar. And so I just want you to think from your own standpoint, the things that we're talking about when we're defining who the millennial is, first and foremost, well, we know that that's not everybody because, unfortunately, we're not all in that age group anymore. But when we look at what they want, I want you to ask yourself, is that not what I want? Or was there not a time in my life where that was extremely important to me as well? So just really be inner and self-reflective as we go through this, as well as thinking about the millennials in your workplace that are working with you, or if you yourself are a millennial and on this call. So let's put out this first poll here. And the question is, what generation is currently the largest in the workplace? So if you could jump in there. And go ahead and answer. Do we have that up? There we go. Okay. So, Ariel, what do you think? Who do you think is the biggest generation in the workplace right now? I didn't tell you I was going to ask you that, was
I don't know.
Okay. Just take a stab.
I was going to say millennials.
Millennials? Oh, okay. All right. There you go. Represent well. All right, Stacia, who do you think it is?
Well, I know that
you know. then don't share yours. All right, so let's close this. All right, and we're going to come back to that answer in just a moment, but I am going to share the results here with you. So for those of you on the call, 43% of you said that you think boomers are the largest generation in the workplace right now. 43 tie with Gen Xers, and 14% of you said that you think that it is millennials. Well, we are going to answer that question here in just a moment, so hold on. We just want to keep you on the edge of your seat. So let's take a look here. Who is the millennial? Well, millennials are young adults between the ages of 18 and 33. We know in general, now remember, we're talking about generalities. Geez, that's not rolling off my tongue. With the whole cohort, that doesn't mean that there's not exceptions, so I really want to make that clear. But as a cohort, they are naturally distrusting of institutions, especially large organizations. Only 26% of them are married. They have a strong desire to feel connected. However, the research shows us that they don't always know how to make those connections. And we know that social media has caused that and created somewhat a sense of false connection. However, that doesn't take away from their desire and need and want to be connected. And they really have a strong dislike and distaste for disingenuousness. So let's go to this next slide. Now, as you're looking at this slide, and there's a lot of information on here, I am going to share with you some research from the Brookings Institute on 11 facts that a lot of people may not realize about millennials. So by the way, one of the first things that I want to say is that, and this is according to Broswell, and Broswell, this was an article that was 6 ways to give millennials the mentorship that they want. And Broswell states that currently now, based off of her research, millennials are the largest generation in the workforce. So That may be a little staggering because only 14% of you thought that it was millennials, but they are actually the largest cohort in the workplace right now.
Well, and if I may add, part of the reason that has happened is that they are actually larger in pure numbers than the boomer generation and a lot larger than the Gen X.
Yes.
So just from the pure amount of people, so not necessarily, you know, how many of them are, you know, entering into the workforce. You might argue, oh, well, from 18 to 24-ish, you know, you're not technically, you know, depending on the workforce, you might not yet be in there, even though they are part of that generation. Just by pure numbers, they're the largest.
However, and you are exactly right with that. However, also keep in mind, part of the workforce is, you know, working part-time, working in fast food, working in, you know, student-type jobs. So that all includes the workforce.
And not only that, but the boomer generation is starting to retire. They're starting to move to part-time and have different types of relationships with their, you know, careers, so that, you know, the diminishment of what had been the largest generation, the boomer generation, and the increase of the younger millennial generation is what's influencing that.
Right, and unfortunately, not that the Gen Xers aren't impactful, but just by sheer numbers, because they were just such a smaller generation.
Just a blip.
Right, so they didn't have near the impact that the boomers did, and then near the impact that the millennials are having by, like you said, numerically, there are so many of them.
And I think we also, you know, have talked about, we talk about every generation. So the fact that the millennials are on our minds today is just by virtue of the fact that it's news, right? Gen X's were talked about just in the same way as millennials were as well.
Yeah,
and boomers as well.
Think about Woodstock. How many of you, their parents are like, oh, yay. My kids dropped out of college and is driving around in a van that's painted with multiple colors. So let's take a look at some of the key facts about millennials from this Brookings Institute. So 11 facts. I just want you really, you know, leaning in and listening. Some of these things were a little bit shocking to me. And Ariel and Stacia, if there's anything that you haven't heard or that you go, oh my, that's a little surprising, please jump in and share. So millennials will comprise more than 1 in 3 adult Americans by 2020. So that's making up over 1/3 of the population in just a few years. Millennials will make up as much as 75% of the U.S. workforce by 2025.
That was one of the more staggering ones that when I read that, I thought, holy.
Yeah, exactly.
But again, pure numbers is driving
Pure
that.
numbers, exactly. But by those numbers, impact is happening. Yeah, and framing things. 89% expressed a stronger likelihood that they would buy from companies that supported solutions that support specific social issues. And we'll talk more about that in just a moment, how important social issues are to them. Millennials account for more than $1 trillion in the U.S. customer spending. Woo! 87.5% of millennials disagreed with the statement that money is the best measure of success, compared with about 78% of the total population. So that's almost a 10% difference there with that. The top ideal employer of currently employed millennials are Google, Apple, Facebook, which I think those weren't a surprise to me. Now, this next was a surprise to me. The U.S. State Department. Disney, that wasn't so much as a surprise. However, this was a little shocking to me. 5 of the top 15 most ideal employers are government agencies for millennials, which would include the State Department, the FBI, the CIA, NASA, and the Peace Corps.
That is surprising.
Not surprising to you? Okay. And part of that may have to do with that sense of purpose.
Yeah, and I guess it's not surprising to me just because I know, especially like out of college and people looking for jobs, a lot of people go towards state and government jobs. And I think also because of that kind of security, like they know that's going to be a good position and that they can grow with that and whatnot.
Yeah, and if I was to read into it, was a surprise to me, not going to lie, but I think what the government does do a really good job of is developing people, right? So the GS system itself is predicated on starting at a 9, going up to a 15, and there's this idea of forward progression. There's pretty, well, not always clear, but pretty clear requirements for getting to the next level, and the opportunities are made and known and available, and so it may seem as a more clear way to develop yourself as a young person than perhaps the sea of, well, how does this work in a a giant organization that's built on something that I'm not as familiar with. Yeah.
And those are all really good points, and I think if your organization doesn't fall into that category, it's definitely important for you to be thinking about how can I appeal more to this generation. So just a couple of more things that I want to share. 63% of millennials want their employer to contribute to social or ethical causes that they feel were important. About half of older Gen Xers and Boomers felt the same way. So, whoa, that's a significant difference. Half of Gen Xers and Boomers felt like they cared about what their organization was contributing to, but 63% of millennials said that they cared.
I wonder, because I think when I think of Boomers, I think of people who are very concerned with the world around them and always have been, and with the advent of all of the civil rights movements and things like that falling securely into that generation. I just wonder if it's the change of, I expect not just myself to care about that, but I expect now my organization to take responsibility as well.
Yes, and you just nailed it. So it's not that the other generations didn't think these things weren't important, but from what we're seeing from research, it's more that they just felt like it was an individual contribution and something that they would take on. And if my organization was aligned with that, then that's great. Versus millennials are more saying, no, I want my organization to be aligned with this and to be making a difference. Yeah. So yeah, good point to point out there. 64% of millennials now, and funny, I was asking Ariel about this, right before we got started, and she was like, yeah, definitely. But 64% of millennials would rather make $40,000 a year at a job they love than $100,000 a year at a job that they think is boring and that they're not feeling connected to. 19% of millennials agreed with the statement, most people can be trusted, compared to 31% of Gen Xers and 37% of the silent generation, and those are those born during the Great Depression, and 40% of Boomers. So listen to those stats. 31% of Gen Xers, 37% of the silent generation, and 40% of the Boomers said people can be trusted. But only 19% said of millennials said people can be trusted. So we realize there's they have to work through this big distrust factor with people. So just keeping that in mind when you're working with this generation. 83% of millennials agreed with this statement. There is too much power concentrated in the hands of few big companies than all of the other generations put together. So that's a huge 83%.
Well, and I wonder if it doesn't have to do with the fact that there have been some breaches of trust over the course of the last 15 so years with big companies, and where some of that mistrust and quite frankly and I'm not trying to politicize anything, but the way that we receive information is so much different than it was even 20 years ago. We were talking about the fear around all these hurricanes recently, right? And back when I was in my early 20s, I would have heard about it on the 6 o'clock news instead of on my feed and in my inbox in the moment and every 5 minutes. So my level of fear around what was definite and what are big events and and that's not sustaining all the political information that's at our fingertips. So I could imagine where that level of fear or distrust about what's being said or and how you're impacted by it is so different by the instant nature and the continuous instant nature of the information we have available today.
Well, and I think, what information is actually accurate of what we're getting as well. But I also think, this is part of what shocked me so much, because the government agencies, which we know are large, State Department, FBI, CIA, to me, it seemed like, whoa, that seems a little incongruent with this other statement that they're mistrusting of large organizations. So I found that a little bit interesting there. And then the last stat that I want to share with you, and then we are going to move on from this slide, but I thought it was so important for us to really wrap our heads around this, is that the average investor aged 21 to 36 has 52% of their savings in cash. So I'm just going to let that sit a moment. That's amazing, because they don't trust large institutions. compared to 23% for other age groups. So think about my husband and I. I think if we were to scrape all the cash we had together, we might have enough to buy a pizza, laying around the house. So if anything ever happened, if there was ever the old-fashioned run on a bank or something like that, we're in trouble.
Yeah, and I wonder if they meant cash or just like in a savings account, but not invested in other types of things too.
From my understanding with that, it's a combination of both.
Okay.
That there is, and I know, so I've got 3 adult children, 2 are married, all fall into this millennial category, and they live, from my experience, they live into this, and they do have money in the bank, but they also have, it's liquid money in the bank too, but then they also have money that they keep at home because they want to be able to have accessibility to literal cash.
Wow.
What would you say about that, Ariel?
I mean, I'm very surprised. I don't keep cash on me.
So anyway, it's just, and like you said, there's exceptions to all of these rules, but it is just interesting. And you did bring out a good point, Stacia. This doesn't mean that they've got a can buried in the backyard with a bunch of cash in it or underneath the mattress.
But I think the liquid funds, being accessible and not necessarily spending, or investing it in either real estate or in, IRAs and 401ks and things like that. Perhaps that's where some of the distrust comes from,
right.
Types of things.
Right. So there was a study done by Victor Lipman, and the study was called "Studies Show Secrets to Managing Millennials Can Be Summed Up in One Word." And so within that article, he makes the statement that the millennial generation is motivated by different incentives and has different values than the previous generations. So let's keep going here, and as we dive a little bit deeper. So looking at this quote. And, I thought that this was so powerful that says, the millennial generation is a cohort whose domineering presence will make up its behaviors as the major motif of American life for this next decade. Well, how can it not? When we look at the fact that 75% of the workforce by 2025 is going to be millennials, and that 1/3 of every person that walks past you on the streets in just 2 years will be a millennial, I mean, how can it not?
Well, and I think what's an interesting thought about that is 20 years ago, that was true of the boomer generation, right? Because the Gen X have always been sort of the smaller, in terms of just portion. And what I think is interesting is that, I think part of the conversation, why we're having this conversation is, like we just said, that some of the value systems are different, right, between these 2 different cohorts. But what I always think about is that our current brick and mortar businesses were built upon people who were there 20 years ago, and that does not include the people who are going to be, and so they built the value sets and the cultures and those things. And so as we stare down, a population shift in those same buildings with those same policies and cultures and things like that, I think that's where, I won't say fear, but the apprehension comes along. Like, how can we make this still work when now, the majority is not going to be people who built this, who believed in the same values or who bought into the same structures, and not to mention the fact that they were built on different technologies and different, just mentalities and worldviews. So,
right. Yeah, precisely. And it's interesting because I think about my own drive and work ethic and the parents I was raised by and the things that influenced me and my cohort. And, in some ways, I am very welcoming. I promise you, I can't say that I've embraced it, and no comments from either peanut gallery here. But I wish I had embraced it more, and I'm hoping too, but this of living more about enjoying life and not being so driven for everything to be about work. Because, we all know the old adage that, we know no businessman or woman who laid on their deathbed and said, I wish I would have spent more time at work. And so I will say and I'm not excusing, because I do think hard work, especially at the beginning, does lay a foundation for us to learn and for us to grow. However, I do think that we can all learn from each other and learn from the different cohorts. And if we can begin to mesh together what we're learning, we would have a much better, if we could lump it all in one cohort, what we would be learning together would be meaningful. So let's take just a moment here and let's shift. So we've really laid a strong foundation of who the millennial is, how they're impacting the workplace. So now let's just take a look, and I'm going to speed up here just a little bit because we've only got about 30 minutes left. But let's take a look at what is commitment. And so I'm going to ask Ariel and Stacia to give their view of this definition of commitment, especially pertaining to the workplace. So this definition comes from the Urban Dictionary. Commitment is what transforms the promise into reality. It's the words that speak bolder of your intentions and the actions which speak louder than the words. It's making the time when there is none. Coming through time after time after time, year after year after year. Commitment is the stuff character is made of. The power to change in the face of things. It's the daily triumph of integrity over skepticism. It is in a sentence, when I say I love you, I mean that I'm committed to working to love you even when it is hard. So now, I know that last statement, we may think of more personal relationships, but I think it can also fall into working relationships.
When I love my work.
When I love my work, precisely. So Ariel, when you think about that definition of commitment in the workplace, does anything in particular come to mind?
I mean, I feel like that was a very thorough definition of commitment. But yeah, I see commitment as, you know, when you have a task or a project that you're working on, that you're committed to doing it, that whatever you say that you're going to do, that you do it and you work hard to do it and you put in the effort that it takes no matter what to get it done. And especially, you know, I know a lot of people work on deadlines and, you know, people will work longer hours to like make sure it's done and whatnot. So yeah, I think in the workforce, commitment's a big thing, and it just, you know, it can look different depending on, you know, what the job is and what your role is. But, you know, I think when it comes down to it, commitment is doing what you say you're going to do.
Yeah, I love that. And by the way, Ariel is not available for hire for any of you trying to get another millennial on your team. So, Stacia, what would you say?
You know, so in addition to kind of my thoughts around commitment before, I like, you know, this particular definition from the aspect of that, talking about, you know, sort of the character of, you know, sort of commitment being reflective of your character, and that, you know, sticking to something even when it's hard, and sometimes even when you're not feeling fulfilled or you're not feeling developed in a situation. I think year over year and day after day, sometimes when it's hard, there's a deeper level of commitment, even than, you know, to an organization or to a career where it may not be easy today, and it might not be going that well today, but over, you know, I think what we're looking for when we're talking about inspiring commitment is, yes, getting the job done, but also committing to, we're in this together, and we are going to all get better together, right? And so we're all going to develop, your leaders will get better, your organization will be more successful, and you as an individual throughout this, we're hoping to inspire millennials and Gen Xers and boomers too to, you know, stick with it.
Yeah.
You know, and that we commit to each other.
Yeah, and so hopefully those of you on the webinar are getting some ideas around what is important to the millennial, based off of just, you know, who they are. It's not something that we can overlook, but also just what commitment means in general, and what it means to human beings, not just millennials, but definitely from that millennial standpoint. Now, if any of you have been around any sort of organizational development, you've seen this before, you're familiar with the Gallup Q12, we know that this was representative of multiple generations, multiple areas of work, and so you know, all across globally, this wasn't isolated in just one or two areas, but this is what Gallup tells us. This is what people are looking for in order to commit. So they're looking for, you know, well, what are my basic needs? So when we look at those basic needs, people just need to know, I need to know what's expected of me. And I need to have the right materials and equipment to be able to do what it is that I need to do. And then when we look at, well, what sort of support do I have from my leadership? Well, do I have the opportunity to do what I do best every single day? Now think about this when we tie this in with millennials, how they're saying, you know, I want to make a difference, I want to contribute. Does that not align with that? Recognition in the last 7 days. So we're going to talk about the importance of millennials needing and wanting feedback. And yes, there are some stats that show that millennials are wanting it more. However, I would beg to say, is it not that they're just not verbalizing it more, that they want it more and probably expecting it because they did get it, whereas other generations maybe didn't, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they didn't want it. And this research is showing us here that they want recognition. Look at this, you guys. In the last 7 days. That's at least once a week. And the supervisor or someone at work recognizes what they do. Someone at work encourages their own development. So feeling like someone cares, that a supervisor or someone else at work cares about them, and feeling like that they're encouraged and they're inspired in their development. So this is aligning with exactly what the millennials are saying that they want. However, I just want to keep bringing it to your attention that these are the foundational elements of people feeling committed in the workplace. Next,
people of all generations.
Yes, thank you for clarifying. That's what yes, people of all generations. And then when we look at the teamwork aspect, so looking at, does my work and does my opinion matter? Does it seem to make a difference? Does the mission and the purpose of the company align with who I am? Are my coworkers also committed to high quality? And do I have a friend at work? Do I have people that I feel connected to? And then last but not least, do I have growth opportunities? Do I have opportunities to learn and to grow? And then have I had opportunities to progress in what it is that I'm doing in the last 6 months, not in the last 6 years, in the last 6 months. So I want you to take a moment and just absorb this from a whole different way. If you have scanned through this Gallup Q12 in the past, really absorb it in thinking about inspiring this millennial generation to commitment. And I had told Ariel I wanted her to share with us, either one of two things, either one where someplace in the workplace, and granted she's fairly young, but she has had a couple of different work experiences, and her time at college. So was there ever someone, even if it was part-time, full-time, whatever that was, that has inspired you to want to commit and be better at a different level, or just the opposite? Has there been a situation that has actually uninspired you where you didn't want to commit or you didn't want to be there much anymore? So if you could just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, definitely. So first I'll talk about where I felt uninspired. And that was just because I felt like I wanted to be a part of the organization and I really wanted to help be a part of that success, but I felt like my opinions weren't valued and I felt like I wasn't heard. So I think that's just really important to understand is, I feel like sometimes people look at millennials of, oh, they're young and like unexperienced and don't, know much or whatnot, but we do have experiences and, we, especially because we're educated and have education, we, studied stuff like, our profession and we have ideas, and I think sometimes people get stuck in their ways of thinking and, they're afraid of change and whatnot, so they're hesitant to listen to us. So I felt like when I wasn't heard and my ideas weren't appreciated, that's when I kind of stopped really being as committed, and I didn't want to really grow with the company because I felt like it didn't matter as much. But organizations where I have felt really inspired to like work harder and felt more a part of the organization, it's because I had people that I could like look up to and that helped me along the way and listened to my ideas. But also I saw where they were and I saw that they enjoyed their experiences as well. So it's like I wanted to kind of get to where they are. So that's like another aspect to it is, your actions of how you're kind of portraying your job and your role. If you're enjoying it, then they can see that as, oh, I want that and I want to grow to that. But if you are coming, into work every day uninspired and don't want to be there, that has an impact on us because we see that as, we don't want that to be us in 20 years, so why would we want that?
Wow.
Yeah.
Well said. Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much for that. So let's do another poll here really quickly. So I'm going to ask you to jump in and share your thoughts on our second poll. So let me get it pulled up and we'll send it out. So Millennials, so when we think about, oh, let me launch it here. When we think about millennials, would you say this is true or false, that they don't want to put roots down in an organization? Meaning that they would prefer to maybe only be there, a year or two. What are your thoughts on that? Okay, so we'll take about another 5 seconds here. Okay, so I'm going to close that and I'm going to share the results. So 80% of you said that this is true. 20% of you said that this is false. Based off of the research that, and I have spent quite a bit of time just because of another project that I was working on in researching the millennials, which we're also applying into today's webinar, which show, and so much of the things that we think are true are being dispelled as false. And so I would say most people thought that millennials didn't want to put down roots, but what we are finding is that that's not true. They are, now a lot of them aren't putting down roots because they aren't feeling inspired and they aren't feeling connected and they don't feel like they can trust things, but the research shows us that they are actually wanting to be committed to an organization where they can grow and they can develop. So Ariel, would you say, have you found that true for yourself?
Yeah, I definitely think that's accurate because, I don't think we go into a job thinking, oh, we're only going to be here for a year. Like, we do want to put down roots and we want to find somewhere where we feel connected and, have that growth and can grow into different positions. But sadly, it happens, I think, because if we don't feel connected or that, what we're doing matters or whatnot, then we do tend to leave and try to look for something else where we can put our roots down.
And I think from what I have found, this generation isn't afraid to leave.
Well, and if I could share, I I remember as a 22-year-old being the smartest one in the room, and someone who felt like I really knew that I had a lot to contribute, but also felt like I wasn't heard sometimes, and I also wasn't feeling like I had the ability to be developed in my organization. I would say that maybe one of the marked differences is that I was scared to leave, and I think it had a lot to do with the economy and the fact that it was very clear to me that if on your resume you had, more than 1 or 2 jumps in, 5 to 10 years, you're not likely to be hired again, whereas now it's more prevalent. People understand that there's lots of reasons for moving around, and for the pure fact that our workforce, now going to be 75%, is likely to have probably 3 to 5 jumps in the last 10 years. That can't not be a reason not to hire somebody anymore. I mean, otherwise you're just not going to be able to hire anybody.
Yeah. And we are just seeing more and more that, when I see someone that's been in one organization for 10 years, I think, wow. And that is impressive to me that they have stayed there, but we do see people move more and more. And it gone, are the days, for the most part, of, 50 years in one place and getting the gold watch. So let's keep going. So this was a quote from one millennial in one of the articles that I read in my research that says, "The thing I am most desperate to keep you from finding out about me is that I want to belong, but I don't know how." And when I read that quote, I thought, wow, that is really powerful. So just hold the space of that for just a moment. And then while you're holding that space, think about this definition of belonging from Brené Brown, which I think is so powerful. She says, belonging is the innate human desire to be a part of something that is larger than ourselves. Doesn't that align with what the millennials are looking for in the workplace? They want to feel like they're a part of something, that they're contributing in some way. And so tying that in, we know Simon Sinek has had a lot of good work around tying it in with the why. He's also got a lot of great videos, TED Talks out there on the millennial generation. So if you haven't watched those, I encourage you to do that. But really helping the millennials in our workforce to be tied into, now, even if what they're doing is very small, how do we tie that in to the greater good? Because I guarantee you there is a tie-in if we will take the time to find that. So moving on, what else do we know about the millennials? Well, the millennials have come of age during a time of massive uncertainty. So it's no wonder that, we see those high stats around feeling like they can't trust people and feeling like they can't trust organizations. Millennials are global and diverse. It was until I was in my late 30s, early 40s, until I started getting to do some traveling outside of the world. It's not anything at all. We have a good friend of ours that her two girls are 11 and 12 right now, and I think they've been to more places around this world than I've ever been to, and they speak 3 different languages, and it's just, they're just very global and diverse. So imagine what it's going to be like when they go into the workplace. Millennials are educated, and they're bringing this whole different ability of thought to the table. And so with that education, they are wanting to contribute. They are wanting to critically think, and so we've got to create the space for that. Millennials are conditioned to expect a constant feedback loop. Now, one of the things, because we didn't have enough time to talk about this today, is that the parenting styles that this millennial generation grew up with. And if you are interested in doing some more research around that, like I said, Simon Sinek has a great TED Talk on that, about the need for this. But regardless of where we want to say, oh, that's rooted in this or that, at this point, it doesn't matter. What does matter is that they want and need that constant feedback loop. But also remembering, when we looked at that Gallup Q12, what did it say? I received feedback within the last 7 days. So 50% of millennials said that the desire for feedback is 50% higher than non-millennials, according to the Harvard Business Review in an article of 2015. Only 46% of millennials say that their leaders are actually giving them the feedback that they need. So I'd ask you on this call today, or on this webinar, are you giving your millennials the feedback that they need? Or if you are a millennial on this, millennials, are you asking for that feedback?
And I think it's important to remember that feedback is both good, right? And they're also looking for developmental feedback.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know what you don't know. And part of, I think, what everyone in their early stages wanted to know more, to learn, to grow, and you can't do that if you think you're executing the way you should, but then you suddenly realize you didn't.
Yeah, and you're right. And by the way, just a little plug here, we do a great training on how to give and receive feedback here at MSBCoach. But the thing that I want to say there, and totally to concur with what Stacia was saying, is yes, feedback, first of all and foremost, isn't just developmental. It's also encouraging and inspiring. And one of the things we know from the research is the 4-in-1 ratio, meaning that I need 4 positive developmental feedbacks to every 1 negative in order for my brain to think that it's fair and equal. So just keep that in mind. Millennials can sense your disingenuousness. So remember, because they came of age during massive uncertainty, and so being able to read that, they're going to know when you're being disingenuous. It's a misnomer that millennials do not want to set down roots in an organization. So that dispels that true-false question that we put out there. They want their organizations to contribute to social and ethical causes. We heard that in the earlier stats that we were reading. They're typically more interested in making a difference than making money. They desire experiences that are engaging, exciting, and in the moment. They want learning to be a two-way street, meaning not only am I learning from you, but you are also having the opportunity to learn from me. Now, I know for some more senior leaders and executives that can be a little bit of a struggle, but I guarantee you, if you will open your mind to curiosity, you will see that there's a space for learning in this two-way street. They would rather be held accountable for problem solving than for punching a clock. And so that's where that old mentality of hiney and chair, so to speak. Well, as long as your hiney is in the chair, from 9 to 5, I feel like you're doing something. That a lot of people can have their hiney in the chair and not doing anything. And so, when we look at this, they want to be more measured on critical thinking and problem solving. And they do have a desire to be loyal. They just want a space where they can commit to that. So I'm going to pause right there. I know we've only got about 10 minutes left and still quite a bit more information here to cover. But Stacia and Ariel, would you guys agree with that from your own life experiences? Would you agree with each of these?
Yes.
Okay. Great.
Yeah. No, I think that these are pretty reflective And the one thing around the two-way street, and part of my own research into generational differences has led me to recognize that that need for sort of mentorship and learning really can go both ways and should, and that the boomer generation is ideally suited really to be mentors and to learn from millennials from a couple of different reasons. That feedback that they're looking for, you know, I hate to remind ourselves, but you look at the generations, the boomers are their parents, right? So they're used to getting that kind of feedback and mentorship from, you know, the types of people that they're working with, but are also of the same generation as their parents. So
yeah,
it's kind of an interesting way to think about it.
It is, yeah, really good point. Thank you for bringing that out. So let's do our last poll of the day. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this one. Millennials prefer to build relationships with their own cohort. So would you say that is true, false, or you're not sure? So if you could jump in. Ooh, we got 100%. All right, let's go ahead and close this. And I'm going to share these results with you. So 43% of you said that this statement is true. Let me try to share this. There we go. 43% of you said this statement is false, and 14% of you said that you are not sure. Well, so remember I said we're dispelling a lot of misnomers here in today's webinar. This is actually a false statement. And I should have asked Ariel. Ariel, what do you think that is? And the reason that this statement is false is that we have found from our research that millennials are actually more connected when given the opportunity because they feel comfortable with all of the different cohorts. They feel comfortable being with them, communicating with them, contributing, and they also desire a relationship. Now, sometimes that desire for relationship can get in the way, especially with organizations that are more hierarchical. Because the person at a certain level may feel like, whoa, wait a second, I don't know that you should be, you know, marching into my office and, you know, we were jokingly telling me what kind of cookies you want in the break room. Not that millennials do that, we were just joking about that earlier. But for the most part, a lot of millennials would just feel like, well, why couldn't I have that conversation? And why can't I have a relationship, you know, with my boss's boss's boss? You know, my parents had their friends over and I talked with them, I communicated with them. My parents taught me to, if my doctor said something, to ask them the why behind it. So why wouldn't they feel comfortable having these conversations? So just keeping that in mind, it's not, I think as an older generation, we may see this as a challenge to our authority, and it really is not. It does have to do with how this generation has been raised as just a part of everything that's going on in their parents' lives and their parents' friends' lives. And so, you know, shared in the conversation and choices if they want chicken salad or peanut butter and jelly, and, you know, and all of these different things that they have been a part of decision making since they were born, really. So how can your workplace inspire millennials towards commitment? Well, I feel pretty confident through all the things that we've gone through. You probably have already gotten some really good ideas, but let's just sum some things up here. So create opportunities to develop authentic relationships. Meet them where they are. Provide vision and communicate that vision, and communicate to them how what they are doing aligns with that vision, because remember, they want to feel purpose. Set clear expectations. Despite the misnomer that millennials don't care, we know from the research they do care, but they need to know what the expectations are. Drive and expect results, but do this together. Work with them on that. We don't just give a pass of, you know, hey, here's your participation certificate in the workplace. But we do need to set clear expectations around that. And we do need to expect results. Serve, and, you know, Ariel, this aligns with what you said. Serve as a genuine role model yourself for them. If you're coming in and, oh my gosh, you're so burnt out and you're just so sick of being here, you know, who on earth is that going to inspire? You know, let alone inspiring a young person. Schedule regular feedback. So I would encourage you, like we have a couple of programs coming up, and I should have put them in here. We have 2 coaching programs coming up, one in October, our Coaching Institute, and then one in November, our focused coaching program to help leaders use coaching tools. So if you're interested in that, you'll see our info at the end and you can reach out to us. But there's 2 ways that you can give feedback. You can schedule it, but you can also do what we call coaching in the moment, where just as you're walking, you can be walking down the hall and you're coaching them, you're encouraging them, you're giving them feedback where it just becomes a part of your daily routine. Provide both mentoring and coaching, and we don't have time in today's webinar to differentiate between the 2 of those, but there is a differentiation between the 2. Mentoring is sharing your knowledge and experience. Coaching is asking questions. Help them to understand how their contributions are making a difference in the workplace. Because remember, they are not interested in just being a cog in the wheel. Identify how what they are doing is contributing to the greater good, not just of the organization, but to the greater good globally of what we're doing, what our organization is doing in the world. Set boundaries. Maybe they are used to being able just to pop in and walk into your office anytime they want. So maybe you set some boundaries around that. So there are certain times where I'm working on things, or if they do pop in, say, well, could you come back in about 30 minutes? I'm working on something right now. So don't be afraid to set those boundaries rather than just getting frustrated. Be consistent. One of the things, and I think this is across the generations, but one of the things that we have found which is really frustrating to the millennials is this lack of consistency. Sometimes you give me feedback, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you set clear expectations, sometimes you don't. So being consistent. Clarify your intentions. Because remember, this generation is naturally mistrusting. So clarify that. Why are you investing in them? Why are you wanting to take them to lunch? Why are you wanting to spend time with them so that they're not feeling like they need to be suspicious or uncertain? And create opportunities to work collaboratively. And by the way, this doesn't just have to be them working with you collaboratively. It can even be them working with each other collaboratively. So what they're bringing to the table, they feel like they've brought some ideas, they get to bring them to the table. Doesn't mean you have to use all of them, but how can you apply what they are developing and creating together? And last but not least, and notice this word together, create opportunities for growth. So when we look through these, whoop, I jumped too far ahead, do these not align with the Gallup Q12?
Well, after you kept reading through those, I was like, yep, that's what I want. Yep, that's what I want. Yep, that's what I. So I think it's important to remember that this isn't a us versus you problem. This is a human nature problem, and it's sometimes just hard to remember that we are all human.
Yes.
And we all want the same things.
Yes.
But it's not easy to give each other or even ourselves all those things.
Right.
It takes work.
It does. And it takes intentional work.
Yes.
And we also have to remember that, yes, if there is what feels like an expectation of someone coming in to want these things, someone can naturally be off-put. But instead, I want to encourage you to shift your mindset. No, these are actually good things. Now, they may be communicating it in a different way or a little bit more assertive way, even by walking out the door is a way of communicating this is what I wanted. But as Stacia said, this is what we see. I would dare say that none of us would say these aren't things we want in the workplace. It's just that this generation is more vocal, they're larger, and so we're seeing it even more of how they want this. So when we look at this quote as we're wrapping up here, I think this is powerful. Millennials' contribution to this world is more than just a passion to them. It is their driving purpose. So that is powerful. And boy, I can say that's true for all of my kids and their spouses. So as a review, we talked about defining the millennials, the impact that the millennials are having in the workplace, and then we shifted to defining commitment. We looked at what stimulates commitment. We looked at the Gallup Q12. Then we asked the question, are millennials looking for something different? So when we looked at what they are wanting, at least collectively here, we said, man, we actually all want that. It's just that it's being served up a little bit differently by the different generations. And so how do you, as a leader, how do you inspire commitment? Or if you are a millennial here on this call, how do you inspire your leaders to even know and understand how to live into the things that you are wanting. How do you communicate that, the things you want, the things you need? And so thinking about that from all of the different perspectives. So if you have any questions or comments, we are out of time here. It's been wonderful being with you today. You can reach out to me directly, Michelle@MSBCoach.com, or feel free to reach out to either of the other two guests that are with me, and it's just their first name at MSBCoach.com. So you can reach out to Ariel at MSBCoach.com or Stacia at MSBCoach.com, and we would be happy to share with you. So just a couple things here at the end. As Stacia mentioned at the beginning, our final Lunch and Learn for this year is coming up December 13th at noon. It's on Own It. In some ways, we'll be hitting on some similar things that we talked about today, but how do we inspire ownership across the board in the workplace? If we as leaders ourselves aren't owning it, why would anyone else be inspired to have an ownership mentality? So if you're not already registered for that, I encourage you to do so. Joanne Auger will be our trainer in that class. She's outstanding. The 3 books that Stacia mentioned that we have on Amazon, you can buy them individually or all 3. Also, people are already thinking about Christmas. So these, give the gift of leadership, give the gift that keeps on giving. So excellent books there. And then here, again, is our contact information. Please connect with us. We want to hear from you. We want to hear if today's webinar met your needs. I know we had a great time. Hopefully you did as well. And to Stacia and Ariel, I say thank you so much for being here with me today and for contributing.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone. Have a great afternoon.